The channel has turned 3 years old, and you know what that means. Time for another yearly recap where we look back on the last 12 months of activity and go over some of the more notable videos released in that time frame. It's a good opportunity for me to expand on things or comment on how they went. The specific window we'll be looking at today is May 1st, 2022 to April 30th, 2023. I won't talk about every single video I made. I usually skip news-related stuff and maybe a couple reviews, but I'll definitely touch on most, if not all, essay-style videos. And I gotta say, this year ended up being bigger and busier than I thought it would be. Before I released any videos, I actually started the channel's 3rd year with surgery to remove my gallbladder due to the presence of large gallstones that were wreaking havoc on my insides and nearly causing an infection. It was not fun. I was in terrible pain for about 36 hours before I was finally under the knife. But before then, I had only brief periods of relief lasting about 45 minutes or so each time, provided by frequent doses of morphine. And let me tell you, I'm glad morphine's not something you can get over the counter because holy shit, that stuff feels great. Anyway, I had my surgery, and about 10 hours later, I was allowed to be discharged from the hospital because staying there for a minute longer than necessary sounded like hell to a homebody like me. So I forced myself to get up and walk around to show that I was fine enough to leave. Then came the week of recovery at home where I did not do any sort of video-related work. But once I felt good enough, I finally proceeded to create again. My first video after the 2-year recap from last year was the importance of emulation, where I went over the usefulness of emulators and how they can be extremely important as a substitute for hardware-based backwards compatibility in modern-day consoles. It's not a perfect replacement, but it can get really damn close. Some of the most popular emulators have a 95% or higher compatibility rate for their respective console's library, and that could be ridiculously useful if the actual console manufacturers were able to implement that technology directly into their machines. Sadly, they're usually allergic to the idea. Microsoft's the closest to being cool with it, considering they allow emulators to function on the developer mode of the Xbox Series consoles, but Sony is paranoid of emulators being used for hacking, and Nintendo is so insanely overprotective of their trademarks and copyrights that they would send armed thugs to your home to beat the shit out of you for emulating anything at all if they could get away with it. But yeah, regardless, emulation is super useful and is often the only thing that ensures older, more obscure games continue to get played at all. But thankfully, we live in a time where smaller companies are getting licenses to reprint some of those older games for modern platforms. Next is my What is a 10 out of 10 game video, where I basically made the argument that since true objective perfection does not exist, a 10 out of 10 score must simply be a gut feeling. Essentially a 9 out of 10 video game that especially resonates with you on a deeper level than other 9 out of 10 games. A 10 should be a personal score, because if objective perfection doesn't exist, then subjective perfection should be the next goal. This is a belief I've pretty much always held, but it took a while to really put it into words. I think I did a good enough job at doing that. Next is my analysis on the addictiveness of Vampire Survivors, a simple and highly rewarding game that gives you something for anything. It's like an IV drip, but gives you dopamine instead. Humans can be pretty simple to entertain. Give them a fairly easy goal, which in this case would be moving a character around to avoid enemies, then completely swamp them with constant rewards for continuing to do it. And not just mechanical rewards either, like upgrades and weapons, but also flashy effects that make you feel as cool as the game is trying to tell you you are. Every once in a while I still open the game up for a quick match. It's quite possibly the best value money can currently buy. After that is my video on EA, Evil Empire, which was a look into their history of acquisitions and closures. This was a topic I was interested in doing for a while but wasn't sure how to approach. But when I found myself with some free time and more motivation than ever, I decided to crack down and start it. I conceptualized the video by first making my own timeline of acquisitions, foundings, and closures on my own document, including details like the name of the studio, when they were founded, when they were acquired, and when they were closed, and if they had any derived studios named after them. It was a more complex task than I expected because EA's history of these things was really complicated. The research done for the video just reaffirmed that EA is still a shady as hell company with a lot of work to do to not be the avatar of game industry avarice. Because contrary to what some might think, EA has not gotten any better. It's just that a few other publishers have become, arguably, even worse. After that, I made a video on game engines, specifically highlighting Capcom's RE engines, EA's Frostbite engine, and Unreal Engine, going over their history, strengths, and weaknesses. I don't dislike Frostbite at all. I think it's a solid piece of work when the game it's running is truly designed for it. But it definitely had a history of making development for some games needlessly complicated. RE Engine continues to impress though, because since I made this video, Street Fighter 6 has had a few really good beta tests, and Resident Evil 4 Remake came out with generally fantastic optimization and a crazy amount of options on PC. It's seriously impressive how RE Engine continues to grow with every major release. And then there's Unreal, which is a bit of a sore spot for some people because, honestly, an annoying amount of individuals think gaming is being ruined by the widespread use of the engine, saying all Unreal Engine games feel the same, but I think that's pretty absurd. I think that claim is an unwitting admission that you don't actually understand how many games use Unreal. But if you want to sit me down and tell me how Assetto Corsa Competizione, Guilty Gear Strive, and Final Fantasy VII Remake all feel the same in a way that the average gamer will notice, then I'm willing to listen. Otherwise, I think blaming Unreal Engine for any kind of stagnation is like looking at a series of houses and blaming their similar appearance on the brand of tools the construction workers used. Then we have a video about the annoying inconveniences of digital gaming, specifically delistings and inability to access old content. Man, I was pissed off when I made this video because I bought a used copy of Forza Horizon 3 and wanted to buy the Hot Wheels DLC for it, only to get slammed with an error message telling me I couldn't buy it because it was no longer available. I was not happy. This game was barely 4 years old and was already unceremoniously deleted from storefronts. This practice is inherently anti-preservation, and I understand it's not easy to get around because licenses for cars and stuff are expensive. But having a game just removed from the market like that in a fewer amount of years than the lifespan of the average console generation is just ridiculously anti-consumer. All of this shit means that if you have any interest in delisted games, your only method of acquiring them is piracy, as I've always been saying. And it's a pain in the ass because I do want to buy these games legally, but I'm left with no choice. After that, I made a video on pragmatic playstyles in games, with a focus on Souls games and Elden Ring because it was really applicable to the content. Basically, all I did was argue that sometimes people find the most enjoyment in discovering and abusing the most busted methods of winning, because that climb and power is what's most satisfying to them. I also defended camping in shooters and battle royales, because at the end of the day, it's up to the opponents to play savvy enough to prevent camping, not on the camper to simply stop. Basically, I am a supporter of taking advantage of metas and community tier lists to gain an edge. But if a game is broken to the point where people are only playing to the meta and gameplay diversity more or less doesn't exist, then that's a balance issue that should be taken up with the developers, not the people who are simply capitalizing on the issue, because those people will always exist. Next up is my history video about the 7th generation of consoles, the PS3, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii, and how much I disliked that era. I'll be blunt, I barely tolerated that generation thanks to a handful of favorites, but looking back on it now, it was even worse than I remember, which is what led me to make that video. It's over 50 minutes long, but I still forgot to touch on some trends at the time, like increasingly simple level design, see BioShock, and god-awful boss fights in Western-developed action games, see Arkham Asylum. I also probably should have highlighted why Dark Souls felt like such a breath of fresh air in that period too, because it really was a game that came out at the perfect time. After that, I reviewed Scorn, and honestly, after 6 months since playing that game, I still do stand by what I said in that review, because while I have no desire to go back and actually play it, I still think about its art direction and aesthetic quite a lot. It really nailed its style, and that will be the primary reason why my memories of it will stay vivid as time goes on. Next, I made a video discussing adaptations, specifically adaptations made with apathy or malice towards the source material. I'll admit I'm a Henry Cavill fanboy, so part of my reason for making the video at all was due to the irritation I felt from my guy not getting any respect as the only actor who cared about the Witcher source material. And then he went on to lose Superman too. I feel for him, I really do. But at least he has that Warhammer 40k project going for him. I'm sure he'll put all the effort he can into it. However, video games getting shitty adaptations from people who don't care is generally a sore spot for me. And it's why I respect things like the Sonic movies or the first Mortal Kombat movie, because even if they're goofy or not industry-changing films, they at least got the spirit of the games they were adapting. And then you have shit like Rooster Teeth's Genlock, which isn't an adaptation, but it's supposed to be a love letter to mecha anime. But Season 2 turns the show into more of a PCP-induced death threat instead. Garbage show made by people who hate the genre they're working on. And seeing that happen always pisses me off. If you sincerely love the niche thing you're creating, then you should play it straight and show respect to the greats that were there before you, not spit in their face and act like you know better than them. After that, we have the video that is the reason for this recap's title, the mistreatment of Mick Gordon. When Mick first released his super lengthy statement and response to Marty Stratton, I was not planning on making a video about it. However, as I read more and more of the document, I felt angrier and angrier for him. Every step of the way, Mick stayed kind, patient, and professional, and all of those attributes were responded to with months of undermining his efforts, followed by defamation on the Doom subreddit. It was a classic, true blue case of character assassination, and worst of all, it actually fucking worked for a while. Marty was temporarily successful in making a lot of people think Mick was a pain in the ass to work with. But thanks to Mick's remarkably thorough response, that success has been completely undone. And I've had videos grabbed by the YouTube algorithm and pushed to others before, but this video was the most runaway success I've had with it so far. With almost 350,000 views, it's my most viewed video by a gigantic margin. Within the first 24 hours after publishing, I was already getting comments from people who said they didn't even play Doom or even know who Marty was, but the YouTube algorithm was recommending the video to them anyway. It just goes to show how important the algorithm is to small channels like mine. Next, we have a series of reviews. First is Pentiment, a dialogue-only adventure game with some role-playing elements. I absolutely love this game, and I recommend checking it out if you like dialogue-heavy or mystery games with a strong art direction. After that was the Callisto Protocol, quite possibly the biggest disappointment I've experienced in a long time. To the point where I've actually forgotten it exists, and the only thing that reminds me that it does is occasional tweets by the cheap-ass gamer account on Twitter saying that it's on sale. To be completely fair to it though, it has gotten a few important updates. It sped up the healing animations, it added New Game Plus, and it added a new, easier difficulty mode dedicated to easier enemy dismemberment. I would say that the game is worth checking out now at a discounted price. However, Callisto Protocol was immediately rendered a pointless derivative once another game came out that we'll get to. The third review in this year-end series was Crisis Core Reunion, a ridiculously thorough and robust remaster that overhauled more things than some full-on remakes do. The original game was trapped on the PSP, and with terribly inferior controls, but Reunion fixed all of that and more. It's a must-play for anyone who loves the world of Final Fantasy VII. Then I started off 2023 with a video talking about the often spouted complaint of there's no video games to play, specifically by people who don't play that many games to begin with. It was regurgitated by a few popular streamers, including Dr. Disrespect, and it spurred me on to make this video, where I go into detail about indie and AA games and how there's a behemoth selection of good games to play within those sectors. I even ended the video with like 40 personal recommendations. I'm sick of this nonsense that there's no games to play. There's always games to play, and it's nobody's fault but your own that you just want clones of what you're already playing. Branch out, experience more. Variety is the spice of life, and you're currently living off unseasoned chicken breasts. Play more games. Also, I kinda suspected later that Dr. Disrespect was only complaining as a roundabout way of generating hype for his Warzone clone that's supposed to have blockchain capabilities and assets worth real money. So, fuck him, I guess. After that was my most anticipated games of 2023 video, and by now, several of them have come out, and lo and behold, I've liked all the ones I've played so far. I have not reviewed every single one, but the list is living up to expectations so far. I'm still foaming at the mouth for Final Fantasy XVI though, as it remains my highest priority. I also forgot to mention Stellar Blade at the end of the video with all the other new IPs coming out. And next up is my video on video game completionism and compulsion. It's something I've thought about on and off for a long time once I discovered the existence of habitual trophy hunters, and all of that time stewing on the subject led me to that chart at the end of the video separating the types of completionism into enjoyment and non-enjoyment, and compulsion and non-compulsion. And then we had the Dead Space review, and man, how fucking good of a game that ended up being. The map design overhaul was excellent, giving Isaac a voice was a good decision, the atmosphere is incredible, and the peeling system is fantastically grotesque. I love it. It finally took the title of Best Remake from Resident Evil on the GameCube, which held onto it for over 20 years, so I don't say that lightly. And then we had one of the best shadow-dropped games ever made in the form of Hi-Fi Rush, a very, very charming and stylized, rhythm-based character action game made by Tango Gameworks. If you haven't played it already, do it. It's an amazing new IP and only $30. Don't just play it on Game Pass. Buy it. It deserves every ounce of success it gets. Following that, I made a video on remakes, specifically my own thoughts on the existence and artistic integrity of remakes. I think remakes within the video game industry are maligned for all the wrong reasons. Games should be allowed to be reinterpreted, especially if the creators of the original want to reinterpret it with modern day technology, which is not that uncommon. To be blunt, I'm not the kind of person who puts old games on a pedestal, including the classics I love. I'm always open to things being changed or improved. And I'm a pretty staunch believer that if you're going to remake something, then you should take the opportunity to make changes. Because a remake that just seeks to be a copy-paste with better graphics is doomed to sit in the shadow of the original and fail to create its own identity. Speaking of remakes, we're getting into very recent territory now as we finish up the recap, meaning I reviewed Resident Evil 4 Remake. Immediately after publishing the review, I realized I forgot one big talking point, which is how I think it compares to the original overall, and if I think it took back the best remake title for Resident Evil from the recent Dead Space remake. Firstly, I'll admit that I love the remake enough that it definitely lowers my chances of going back to the original, but it's still not as much of a clear-cut preference like with Dead Space. The Dead Space remake is such an overwhelming improvement in my eyes that I don't think I'll ever touch the original again unless it's for research for a video. So overall, I think Dead Space still retains the best remake title. Regardless, both of these remakes are incredible, both as remakes and as entirely separate entities. After the review, I made an analysis video on the history of item management in the Resident Evil series, where I went over some of the major inventory systems of the mainline games, specifically the original, the item box list system of RE0, the attaché case, and the RE engine overhaul of the original. One comment did point out that I did not touch on the auto sort for the RE4 Remakes attaché case, so to quickly add an addendum, I do think the auto sort does a decent job at what it's supposed to do. But once your attaché case is almost totally full, you will still need to rearrange some things manually due to the auto sort placing items horizontally, starting from the upper left corner of the case, then going to the right, then moving to the next row and starting again. It does a good job at grouping similar items together though, so auto sort will be enough for most people most of the time. It just takes every item into account individually, one at a time, instead of scanning all contents as a whole like human players tend to do. And lastly, we have my What is Real Final Fantasy video, which is already proving to be a little contentious as I expected. The video is still quite new, and as the longest video on my channel now, it's stuffed with a lot of context I highlight, and some I probably should have highlighted more. I also should have taken the chance to make some of my points a bit clearer. Again, the purpose of the video is not to make anyone like anything, it's to argue that there's no set formula for mainline Final Fantasy games. And if there ever was one, it's been gone for over 20 years. Final Fantasy is an anthology series that shares concepts and themes between each game. Mechanically speaking, the only gameplay aspect that really matters is role-playing, because that's how the series best delivers its complex stories. Whether that role-playing is facilitated through team-based, turn-based combat, or real-time action combat is completely up to that specific game and the story it's trying to tell. Final Fantasy XVI, for example, is purposefully zooming in on the story of one man, Clive, and Yoshi P and team decided that the action combat fit this experience better. And it likely does, because it lets them go all in on the mechanical depth of controlling one character. The thing with anthology series is that if you're not down with whatever the newest game is trying to sell, then you can wait for the next one, because it could be vastly different. I do suspect they will stick with action combat for another game or two, but we could be surprised. 17 could go back to being team-based and maybe command-based too. The anticipation of the wait is part of what I like about the series. I'm always eager to see how the next game will be different. Not every game is a home run, I am aware of this. But the magic lies in the ambition to be unique. And that pretty much does it for the Year 3 recap. It's been a big year. I made way more videos than I thought I would. Some of them ended up being a lot longer than I thought they would too. I started the year with surgery that removed an organ from my body and ended it by breaking my own record for longest video on the channel. And this is after I said, almost 2 years ago now, that I might slow down in activity on here due to my new job, which I am still working at. So much for that, huh? Also, as a final note, I am recording my voice for this video on a new microphone. The third one I've used now for this channel. It's a really nice $70 plug-and-play USB mic. I also got a pop filter for it. And honestly, assuming it doesn't break, this might be the last mic I ever buy. Because the only step up from here that would provide a significant improvement might be something that crosses the $200 mark. And I'm not really keen on spending that much on a microphone, especially before I've really started making decent money for my videos. And this concludes our look back on Year 3. Hopefully, Year 4 will be just as prosperous, if not more so. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.